All right, I'm here with Derrick Broze. We're going to talk about probably some kind of dark subjects today. You know, I don't know exactly where we're going to go, but I think we're going to focus on the Finders cult quite a bit, because the Finders cult is the first one I stumbled across when I realized the child trafficking was true. You know, it's none of us want to believe that could be true, but that Terrell case in Belgium might not be saying it right. You know, I stumbled across those two and I was like, wow, this is real. It's unsettling. It's not something you want to rabbit hole you want to go down, but I think Epstein Files are kind of opening a lot of people's minds to look at this stuff. So let's get into the Finders cult. Like, I don't even know where to start. It's insane. Like, I think you're more well researched on it, a lot more well researched than I am on it. But just where would you even start with that?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Jake. The Finders is something that I started researching in 2018, right after I made my Jeffrey Epstein documentary, which is called Bringing Down Jeffrey Epstein, which actually ended up in the Epstein Files because apparently people were emailing about it. But after I wrapped up my Epstein investigation, much like you were saying there with the Dutroux affair and other cases, the Franklin scandal, I kind of had heard about these things, and I'd heard the name the Finders over the years, but I'd never really took a look into it. And I decided, well, I just finished this Epstein documentary. Let me sort of look at the bigger history of these accusations. And once I did, I mean, I was honestly blown away, because obviously now here in 2026, we've got all this evidence and emails related to Epstein. But prior to that, I think the Finders is one of the most well-documented case of the intelligence networks being involved in this group, which definitely appeared to be trafficking children. And there's other claims relating to Satanism and things like that, which I think are less credible. But for sure, we know for a fact that there were claims of the Finders cult having intelligence connections. And so, yeah, as I started to look into it, it turned into first like a 5 or 6 part series of investigations I was doing on YouTube back in 2019. And that evolved into an hour-length documentary, which I produced and released in, I think, March 2020 or March 2019, which was called Who Will Find What the Finders Hide. And that actually involved me while I was in Florida at, going to investigate Epstein. I filmed the scene in front of Epstein's house. And then I happened to realize that one of the main members of the Finders cult lived in Florida as well. And I went to go visit him in person. His name is Robert Terrell. And I was able to interview him for the documentary. And then I interviewed him again in 2021 after the documentary came out, and he didn't like what I put. And so I've just been following the case for like 6 years. And I do believe that my documentary, which people can find at theconsciousnessresistance.com, I have a whole section on the Finders cult. You can see all of my reports since 2019, including the documentary. I do believe it's the most extensive work that has been done on the Finders cult. So, just to give everybody a rundown of what happened. So we're in February 1987. There's 2 well-dressed men, basically men in suits, that are seen at a park near Tallahassee, Florida, with several children. And an anonymous caller basically reports them to the police and says that they see these men in suits with a van parked at the park, and kids who they described as looking disheveled with bug bites and hair all messed up and just, not looking too good. And so this led to the cops eventually showing up, and they arrested these 2 men. And one of them, pretended to faint. This is like, it's funny when you go back and read the old articles. One of them, he just like falls on the ground and like, oh, I'm not gonna let you take me. And we found out later, of course, that the Finders members had been sort of trained on what to do in case they ever had to interact with police. Wow. And that was one of their strategies, is just like, lay dead and sort of civil disobedience, I guess. But they ended up being taken and arrested, and the kids get taken. And this immediately sets off this first local and then international firestorm in the media, which is kind of interesting to think, because, I'm talking about headlines in the Washington Post, New York Times, Associated Press, things that we wouldn't expect today. Obviously, again, Epstein's making the news because they just can't ignore it anymore. But even just 30, 40 years ago, the media was doing a lot more reporting on these topics than they do today. And I will say, side note, that looking back at this time in the late 80s, mid 80s, 70s and stuff, this is all, labeled Satanic Panic. So if you were to look this up right now, the Finders cult, they're going to tell you it's Satanic Panic. There was nothing there. Vice did, a horrible report on it a few years ago, saying how the Finders cult was the original QAnon and how it sparked this whole wave of conspiracy theories. They don't take, they don't do any effort to actually look into the case. So I just want to make a note of that. People will dismiss this as Satanic Panic because of the time period. Again, I don't know that we can prove any of these satanic accusations. Yeah, I think that some of that's the weakest part.
I think there is some, but I think some of that actually. Well, let me say real quick. I think it was 6 children, ages. Do you remember the ages 2 to like 10 or 11?
7 years
I think
old. Yeah, there was like
6 children.
2, 6,
Yeah,
7,
they
8.
didn't know the parents. And the satanic thing comes from they raided one of the places. I think most of the hard drives are gone out of most of the finders cults. You might have more details on this, but they raided one and they found pictures of the kids doing sacrifices with like lambs and stuff. So that sounds pretty credible to me. Like, what's your thoughts on that?
So I'll tell you about that. Yeah. So let me get there. It's actually a goat. I want to set that up first, just for people who know what, because yeah, I do think there's something there. But so the men get arrested, they get taken in. And like I said, it sets off this international firestorm where for one, and we see this in numerous police reports and newspaper reports, that they had to take the children from one location at the police department to another hidden location because they said they started to get death threats, that people were calling into the police department, threatening them, which many believe was the finders, like, group sort of trying to threaten them. And then there was people calling them from all around the country saying, I think that's my child. I think that might be my child. And so just all this confusion sets off. It makes the international news and the national news. They say they're investigating it. Immediately they say this could be a satanic cult. And then what happens from there is in Tallahassee, when the arrest took place, the cops from up in Washington, D.C., the Metro Police, one of the investigators there, he heard about the arrest. He calls down to Tallahassee and says, hey, you guys are holding this group. I think it might be connected to some things we've been investigating up here. And they basically talk. And after talking, that investigator's name is Brad. I can't remember his last name right now, but basically he used that arrest as a opportunity to get a warrant, and then he went and raided the finders' properties that were in DC. They had 2 apartment complexes that buildings that they owned and that they lived in together, and then they also had a farm in rural Virginia, and then they had a warehouse as well. And so whenever the arrests happen in Florida, where these men are traveling, and they claim that they were traveling to Florida to take the kids to a school for gifted children. Who knows what they were actually going to do with them, but that's where they got stopped. And then that sets off the whole thing where they raid their apartments. The Virginia State Police raid the farm, and then the DC Metro Police raid the warehouse. And because there was potential for this to involve trafficking children across state lines, the U.S. Customs Service got involved as well. So you had on the raid of the warehouse, you have the DC Police and the U.S. Customs together going through the warehouse. And that's where you start to find the things you were describing, where they described finding pictures of naked children. They described like a room that looked like it was clearly an area for photos and games, or, which you could imagine what might be happening there. They described having passports, multiple passports. They had a Chinese dictionary. They had really what we would consider to be, I think, early wired internet. This is 1987. Computers did exist, but they were nowhere near as prevalent as they are today, of course. And the average person definitely didn't have them. And they described how the finders were, again, using like landline internet, and that they found like a message that one of the finders had left, basically telling them all to disperse and to scatter to the winds and things like that. So there was clearly something going on. They had been tipped off in some way. They also had multiple passports and things of this sort. And there's actually, in one of the newspaper articles, you can find, it's the only existing picture of that evidence that we just described there, where you see one of the Metro Police officers walking out of the building, and he's got like a giant trash bag filled with whatever, and that's the last time it's ever seen. Now, U.S. Customs Agent Ramon Martinez, Ramon Martinez, he's the customs agent who went along with this, and he, in his report, which we do have the copy of, he wrote the most details, and he said there was pictures of naked children, there was instructions on buying children from China, there was all this kind of stuff. And so he files his report. The Metro Police, they take all the evidence, and he basically assumes something's going to happen. And then within a couple of days, he decides to follow up. He goes to the Metro Police. He's like getting stonewalled. He's not hearing anything. And eventually he claimed that when he went back to the customs, or to the Metro Police, that he was told that it had become a CIA matter, and that, the Metro Police were no longer involved in that. Now that's U.S. Customs Agent Ramon Martinez. This is 1987. So he's like, what the heck is going on? Now, meanwhile, in the public, the whole story changes. It goes from being like, this is a satanic cult and trafficking of children, and then the men are held for about 30 days or so. But very quickly, the story starts to change, where at first when they found them in Tallahassee, you have the medical examiner in the Tallahassee Police Department, which we have all these police records. I've got them in a finder's archive I put together, where the initial medical report says that 2 of the children showed signs of sexual abuse. One of them, a little boy, they said that his rectum was, his sphincter, he had loss of anal sphincter control, which they thought was probably due to sodomy. And then one of the little girls, I believe her name was Mary, her hymen had been broken, which they said was probably the results of, something going on there. And so that was like the first thing, right? But then they claimed there was a mistake, and they had another medical examiner examine them again, and he claimed that was all mistake and nothing to see there. The first medical examiner imagined the whole thing, I guess, and none of that actually happened. So then very quickly, within about a month, the whole story gets reversed, and it's, whoops, we made a mistake. The Washington Metro Police are announcing there's nothing to see here. The men are going to be let go. And that's it. That's the official version of the events. It was just a big mistake that happened. These are just eccentric former hippies who are raising their kids and like homeschooling and unschooling. And that's
raping them.
I mean, that's what it kind of looks like, right? But thankfully, Ramon Martinez, the customs agent, he didn't give up, because when he started to file his report and then he heard it's a CIA matter, he goes back to the department, his own department, customs agency, and starts kind of saying, like, there's something going on here. The CIA is getting involved. And, I followed up with his story as well. He ended up being disciplined a couple times. They said that he had a reputation for sticking his nose where it didn't belong, but he kept speaking about this. And actually in 1992, going into 1993, he was speaking. You can find articles of this where he was talking to, I think his name was Charlie Rose. He's a politician. He's now dead now. He was talking to a few politicians and just kept telling them, like, look, I'm a whistleblower. This is what I saw. There's a cover up going on. And so in 1993, it makes the news again. The finders get back in the news because the Department of Justice, much like with Epstein, they announced that they're going to investigate these claims that the CIA had been involved in trafficking with this cult called the Finders. And again, you can find historical news reports of all this stuff. And so there's an investigation, there's a commission, blah, blah, blah. And, wouldn't you know it, they investigate themselves and they say, no, there's nothing to see here. And that's the official, like, boom, it's over. The Finders are done. There's nothing to see here. And Ramon Martinez, his career is just completely destroyed after that point, of course, because he just looks crazy. Everybody's saying he made things up. So that's like kind of the overview, and I can get deeper now into the details of disproving why that is completely false, because we have numerous people, not only Ramon Martinez, but others speaking out about this.
Yeah, no, I love your details. But one question real quick, something that I found interesting, you might know more of the details, but I remember reading they found a bunch of documents, very disturbing. One of like watching like babysitter ads, like they were applying for like babysitting positions, and also all international, like all over the world. Like they were looking at, I can't remember if it was orphanages or they're looking for ways to basically gain kids all over the world through kidnapping in America and through other countries. And it's just, we don't want to believe it. Documents.
This is one of the interesting pieces of it, because they were definitely international. And the thing about it is most of the Finders members, we know a few of their names because there was a leak of the list of them in the mid 2015 or 16. I found like a random blog that had leaked some of the members' names, and it checks out. And some of them, they basically, many of these people are alive today, by the way, like they're still living and existing and around, and they promote themselves as journalists or investigators. The reason they claim that they have the nickname the Finders is because they collect finder's fees, that they were good at finding things. And, because they were early on the internet and early technology, they were good researchers. And so that's also why they claim they had passports for different places around the world, and that they were, involved in searching things internationally. But it definitely seems like, in my view, I've come to view over the years that they were some sort of private, non-governmental intelligence service that seemed to have been used by the CIA in different ways. And in fact, as I'll share in a little bit, there's at least one investigator who believed that. And when you start to look at the different companies associated with the Finders Incorporated, there's all these general company names, which actually would be really interesting to search those names in the Epstein files and see if anything pops up, because I've been searching for a connection between the two of them. So there's like, this.
Like a private, just like Epstein, that seems what he was, like a private entity contracted out by these governments to do their dirty work.
I think that's definitely what these how they operate, in the sense it sort of gives them a little bit of plausible deniability, and it doesn't, so they're like, well, that's not technically us, it's some group, right? But there's numerous reasons to discount and to disbelieve the official story of the Finders. For one, of course, Ramon Martinez, as I said, this guy's still alive. And for those who go watch my documentary, Who Will Find What the Finders Hide, I tell the story that when I was making the documentary, and as I was, I'm starting to track down and email all kinds of people, including I found the person who was the person who made the anonymous call on the finders when they found them at the park. I found the person who apparently filmed it. The guy's still alive, but he says he can't find the tape. Like, so I'm digging up old files. I'm contacting people. There was definitely a few times while I was making the documentary where I came home, my windows were open, just like random shit like that. That made me kind of like, all right, if anybody's keeping tabs on this, they're definitely aware that I'm making all these phone calls and trying to follow these people. Well, I actually found Ramon Martinez. I had found his email and I contacted him. I told him, like, look, I'm making a documentary all about the finders. I would love to feature you in it. And at first he was like, okay, here's my number. Let's talk. And then within 24 hours, he basically kind of backed out and was like, hey, I don't want to do this anymore. But in the email, and I include this in the documentary, he specifically said, I have no hope that anybody will ever be held accountable for what I know happened. Like, he still stands by his story. He said that one time in like the 80s, like shortly after the 80s, like in the 90s, I think, when it was becoming a DOJ investigation, that 60 Minutes was actually going to do a report on it. And he said he did an interview for it and it never happened. And so he's basically says like, look, what's the point? Like, okay.
Yeah. Well,
you guys are going to talk about it.
I would love to interview him. I had a guest yesterday pulled out because he had credible threats on his life, he felt. And you never know what's true and what's not, but I felt like he wasn't lying. Obviously, I can't get into what we were talking about because he don't want to put him in any more danger. I can't guarantee anything was real, but it seemed like the threats seem credible to me.
These things do happen, obviously. And I can't blame Martinez completely, right? I mean, the thing is, the dude is he's probably in his early 80s now. He was in his late 70s when I contacted him then. He's retired. He's on the East Coast. He's teaching Tai Chi at a retirement hall, community. And after I emailed him a couple times and then he shut down, was like, I'm not going to do this. I tried to call him. He just refused to answer. And so I felt while I was making the documentary that I wanted to do my journalistic due diligence. And I actually flew from Houston, Texas, where I'm originally from, where I was at when I was making it. I flew to the East Coast and I tracked down where he taught Tai Chi at. And I did a little stakeout, and waited for him to walk outside. And I walked up to him. I recognized him. Like I had a 30-year-old picture, but this guy was pretty recognizable. So I walked up to him. He's got like a Bluetooth headset on. He's in a leather jacket, walking to his truck. And I just walked up and said, "Hey, Mr. Martinez, I'm Derrick Broze." And for a moment, he shook my hand, and I think he realized who I was. And he's like, "Get the fuck away from me! Get the fuck away from me!" And he's talking to whoever's on the thing. He's like, "It's that freaking journalist coming after me." And I just stepped back. I'm not trying to harass him or anything. I was like, "Look, Martinez, you can blow this story wide open. Please, like, just share what you know." And he's just like, "Get the fuck away." And, at that point, it's like, look, I'm not going to harass this guy. You crossed the line from just questioning to, harassment. Yeah. And so I went home and I made the documentary. I think so. I think he is. And then this is why maybe he would talk to you because,
he's probably like dejected and stuff. I couldn't imagine that feeling. For years you're screaming, hey, and everyone's just like disciplining him, getting in trouble. I mean, or he could have threats, but I would say he's probably just
I think it's maybe both. I mean, and
thanks for watching Fight Back Podcast. If you like the show, like, subscribe, or share the video. There's also donation links in the descriptions. As many of you guys know, I run a free speech podcast. That comes as a price. It's being demonetized everywhere. So one way to support the podcast is to buy your books from AntelopeHillPublishing.com. Today's selection is The Trans-Industrial Complex. This book covers the money-making machine of the trans industries and shows it's not to help people, but to make money and get rich. So again, if you want to support the podcast, go to AntelopeHillPublishing.com and be sure to use promo code FIGHTBACK. That'll save you money and support me. Thank you.
Your point about whether or not he would do an interview, I would definitely love to facilitate if that he will. I'll tell you this, because of I doing that. He wants nothing to do with me. I have another journalist friend who also, his name is John Brisson.
You can get me his email and I'll email him.
I will definitely do that. Another great researcher is John Brisson, and he actually is in touch with Martinez. John is working on a book about the finders, and he actually sent me some screenshots where basically Martinez is just like, "Fuck that guy," I don't want to have anything to do with him. And all I did was try to get him to speak, because what I'm trying to get him to see, though, is what you understand, and what I think everybody understands now is like, dude, when you were saying this, though, this was the 80s and the 90s. Now Epstein's gone mainstream. All this stuff's out in the middle. Like, people are ready to hear this. So to me, this would be the time to come forward. Yeah. Like, if you could really get a more receptive audience.
I think a lot has changed.
Exactly, a lot has changed. And then, of course, again, I get he might just want to retire, and he might just want to retire and go quietly into the night. Like, I don't blame him for that. You know, he's probably grateful he's alive and nobody's tried to take him out, because he is one of the main whistleblowers. There are two other, what I would consider whistleblowers, and one of them did die under mysterious circumstances. I'll just tell you about him real quick. His name was Sergeant Spencer, and he was within the Metro Police Department. And myself and John Brisson and other researchers, we found out he was the one who told Martinez that it had become a CIA internal matter, because when Martinez tried to say something about it, you know, they were like, what are you talking about? You know, he spoke to some random person at the Metro Police that claimed this, but it was a Sergeant John Spencer. And then actually, again, you can find articles about this, about John Spencer, you know, kind of making some comments that there had been a cover up. I also did another report on another officer. His name was Scott Hunt. And again, you can find articles about Scott Hunt saying that there was a cover up going on in the Metro Police Department. So there was several people, like, it wasn't just Martinez, this crazy guy and the customs agent who imagined pictures of naked children and made up this whole thing. It was people within the Metro Police Department themselves that were trying to, the Tallahassee and the Metro Police Department that were trying to blow the whistle. Because again, Tallahassee is where the arrests happened, but the finders were really based in DC and had a warehouse, and they had the apartment buildings. Right. Now, the other thing, they're right near Comet Ping Pong used to be, in fact, and that's one other thing people pointed out, like, yeah, like in that same area. Not to say there's a connection. I'm just saying, you know, they're in the same general area.
But it's worth looking at. It's definitely worth looking at. It doesn't mean there's a connection, but you have to look at these things.
Yeah, and then we had the Virginia State Police that they raided the Finders Farm. This is another one that I think they are absolutely still covering things up, because so when I was making the documentary in 2019, Ramon Martinez customs report had made it to the internet. We had some of the Metro Police Department, but it was very little documentation, but it was enough to say, like, hey, there's something here going on. I put out my documentary in February, March 2019, and then I'm looking at it right now. Later that year, I think it was October, the FBI, you know, they have the website, The Vault, where they just post all kinds of documentation. I encourage people to go to The Vault, search the finders. They did 4 document dumps starting October 2019 over 2022. So I don't know why. It could have been coincidence, but 6 months after my documentary.
What website can we check this out? FBI?
Yeah, if you go to vault.fbi.gov. So the Vault is basically what the FBI calls like their records database, and you can find stuff on JFK and all kinds of stuff. But for whatever reason, out of nowhere, in October 2019, they started posting Finders files. And so you can find, if you search on the Vault, the Finders, you'll see Finders number 1, 2, 3, and then 4. And the 4th one, it says final. And these are hundreds of pages of documents. And it just happened to come, you know, within 6 months of my documentary. I'm not saying it had anything to do with me, but it was interesting timing for sure. Yeah. And then, so we do have a lot of documentation, but one of the areas we don't know anything about, because again, you got Washington, D.C. Metro Police, you got Tallahassee, you got customs agent, but then you also have the Virginia State Police. They're the ones who raided the Finders Farm, which is in rural Virginia. I found articles, newspaper articles, saying that neighbors said that they saw children in cages, that they heard, this is in documented mainstream news, and that they heard children crying and all this kinds of stuff. Well, myself and other journalists have filed open records requests to the Virginia State Police saying, you know, turn over any records you have related to the Finders, and they've continued to deny them. So even as of 2026, those files still haven't been released. In the last couple of days, since me and you have been talking about this, I started kind of digging into some of my old Finders research, and I actually found a few other threads that I wanted to pull on, which are related to Virginia. So I did file some open records request again, asking for any, you know, information by the Virginia Culpeper County, which is where it was at. But yeah, so those records are still being held secret. That's one thing to know, is like there's more info there.
They legally have to hand them to you, right? But they're just not. They're just refusing.
They're claiming, you know, some exception of whatever BS. You know, they can always wiggle their way out of it if they're
supposed to have access to these records. It's like I just requested some records that are taking forever, and I'm like, not sure if I'm going to get them. So same thing really with some Vegas.
Yeah, and it's you know, when you play the FOIA game, the open records request game, sometimes you get hits and a lot of times you get denials now. But what I want to point out is on the Vault, again, everybody can see this themselves, FBI, the Vault. So again, the website is vault.fbi.gov. And if you search the Finders, you'll lead to the Finders files. If you go to Finders Part 1, and that's the first page, and it's like 300 something. If you go to page 66, I just want to read to you this summary. This is marked secret. All right. This is a file that wasn't released until 2019. Yeah, and it says, and the original, it's on the FBI website, but it was originally from the Metro Police Department in DC. So this was the summary, the conclusion. And this is interesting because it's coming from the Domestic Security Branch. It's dated April 13th, 1987, titled The Finders Investigation. And this is what it says. I'm just going to read it to you word for word. Summary. It is this writer's belief that the Finders organization is and has been utilized by the Central Intelligence Agency as a disinformation service spreading non-essential, non-critical information to various organizations throughout the United States and overseas. I mean, the first sentence, like this investigator believes they're connected to the CIA. The group is, to the most part, is made up of overeducated non-achievers who lack the inborn initiative to succeed on their own. Therefore, they fell in with a charismatic leader, who we'll talk about in a moment, Marion Petty, the guy who started the Finders, who gave them direction and self-importance. To the most part, this organization individually is harmless. However, when directed and monitored by a controlling factor, they are capable of destructive and illegal activities. In any cult structure, the main drive is for the group, and individual values and ideology is lost. Therefore, when a member is asked to perform a task that heretofore may have been objectionable, he or she performed this mission for the good of the group. As to the abuse of the children, I do not think that the child abuse was a planned tactic of this group, but as in any cross-section of society, sick and demented subjects belong to a cult as well. I do believe that the shaping of the children is a planned experiment. As in the case of the Nazis, they strove for a perfect society. Thereby, in their own way, they tried to form a group of children and ultimately adults that did not suffer from the ills of normal society. Lastly, and this is another important piece, I do not feel that the Finders have disbanded as reported by their leaders, but instead, as reported in their master plan, which we've never seen, have appeared to disband to protect further investigation by law enforcement or social service officials. I firmly believe that this group should be monitored in the general sense, and if further developments occur, they should be noted.
Wow. So their plans, they don't have, the police obviously saw the plans, but they haven't been released to the public. Is that correct?
It's not in any of these files here. I've never seen it in any of the other files that I've found access to. I think that could be something else that they're hiding. Obviously, just like with the Epstein files, we know they're not going to release everything.
Like that, like it's it's like, I mean, yeah, I've been digging through the Epstein files, and it's just so frustrating. You know, I'm new to trying to learn to investigate things, and they release so much of the Epstein file that it's hard. That I think intentionally that it's hard to find.
I think so.
Sift through it.
It's part of that strategy. It's like flooding the zone with so much shit that you can't even, focus. Like, right, you could spend
some stuff not related at all. So you're like, well,
exactly, a lot of stuff not related. And I mean, I've been kind of on my own trying to dig up some threads and searching the Finders. And yeah, I mean, it can consume all of your time. And sometimes you're like, shit, am I getting any closer to the truth? I don't know. Like, or am I just wasting my time? Yeah. So it's a struggle now.
But
the Finders, we have these clear lines like that. I mean, again, I'll just reiterate, like the first line of this investigator, who is not named, of course, they don't put his name, but says that the Finders were a disinformation service used by the CIA. There's another document where one of the investigators says that he believed that the Finders were trained by the CIA, but they had, quote, gone rogue. So there's definitely some connection. We don't know the full extent of it, but there's also things like I mentioned, the Finders, they owned a bunch of different companies and they operated under these companies that some former CIA agents or former current CIA agents worked for those companies. So there's all these weird overlaps that they're like, oh, that was just a mix up, because one person worked here one time, but there's no actual connection. But then you look at the guy who started the group, his name's Marion Petty. And this guy is a completely interesting character. There's only 2 pictures that we have of him. And he came out of Naval intelligence. He was in the military basically right after World War II. And he claimed to have met like all the generals and all these, powerful people, again, worked in intelligence. And then he claimed that he retired and he decided to just be a chauffeur, and he chauffeured around all the generals and stuff. And so that allowed him to make a lot of contacts and things of that sort. Now, his son worked for Air America, which was, tied to the CIA and drug trafficking. His wife worked for the CIA. These are all documented facts. So there's, all these claims like there's no intelligence here. It's like, okay, the guy came out of Naval intelligence or Air Force, Naval intelligence. His wife worked for the CIA. His son worked for a freaking CIA cover, airline. So those are all weird enough on his own. And he kind of comes about at the time where, of course, the hippies were starting. There was a lot of different hippie groups that many have been suspected to be tied to the CIA as well. They were a little different because they weren't about drugs. They weren't about like living the party life. It was a bit different, where the idea of the finders, and they all called Marion Petty, they called him the game caller or the stroller, because he apparently walked all around the town, all the place. But they called him the game caller mainly because they would get together, they'd be in these houses, and they kind of had like a free love spirited thing going on with, guys sleeping with multiple women and the babies being raised by everybody or whatever. And they would say, game caller, give us a game. And then Marion Petty would give out assignments, like seemingly random things to people, like go to San Francisco and bring back a piece of gold or something like that, right? They talk about a bunch of different ones. And some of them might have just been completely innocuous and crazy and weird just for the sake of it. But the way I've sort of interpreted it is, I think that there was, like many groups, you have sort of rings inside of rings, right? So the outer ring was probably just the people who were involved, and maybe they went to the finder's house one time. I've been emailed by plenty of people like, oh, I hung out at one of their places in the 70s or this and that. Not necessarily people who saw anything, but who got weird vibes and who were there. So I think that's kind of the outer ring. Enough people would be sort of involved. They would go play a fun game that they're just like, oh, it's just quirky, weird things. He's just trying to teach us life lessons on how to be ready at a moment's notice and this sort of thing. But then also, as I mentioned, a lot of them were journalists or investigators. And so he would send them to different parts of the world to go complete tasks, and they'd come back. And I think when you get closer to that inner ring, including Robert Terrell, who's the guy I interviewed, who in his own words told me he was his right-hand man and shared a toothbrush with him for 20 years. Like, this guy knew him very well. And I think people like him had to have known what was going on, had to have known that there was intelligence connections and that there was trafficking of children going on. But that's sort of the way that they framed it. It's just a game, and he's the game caller. He'll give you little silly assignments, and it's all about challenging the norms of society. But I think that was just the cover for it, and then inside, internally, there was the trafficking of children. There's like some sort of international missions going on. They had passports for Vietnam at the time of the Vietnam War, North Korea, Cuba, places that, again, the average American couldn't get into because of conflict.
You couldn't even get passports to those. Like, we can't get passports to those places. That's like so difficult. I don't want to go off, but just a little footnote to add. The Church of Set, was that Michael Aquino? What was his name? Michael. Anyway, I can't pronounce his name right. He was military psychological. He worked in the psychological division of the military, and he was accused of the same thing, of all these kids, trafficking kids, molesting kids, satanic rituals of them, both in San Francisco, and he has some ties to the Franklin scandal. I don't want to get offshoot, but that just shows another military intelligence connections, just as you were saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael Aquino. He's another, that's a whole other thread. Yeah. And I think that each of these stories deserve time and scrutiny. I mentioned the Franklin scandal earlier. There's others that have been the McMartin preschool thing. There's a lot of them that I think show that this isn't something that started with Jeffrey Epstein, right? And it didn't even start with the finders, I don't think. And I don't even know if that, like, most likely, like this officer said, after this whole scandal broke up, they probably just disbanded, renamed, or maybe, why would they even give themselves a name? That was just kind of a nickname that was given to them because they had finder's fees, which has its own sort of, sketchy thing going on. Mm-hmm. But I think that these are just networks that occasionally maybe they make the mainstream or they get exposed, but the general concept of private intelligence, using these people who are outside of government, outside of military, or maybe were trained by the military to go out there and do these things and sort of do black ops and things that the CIA can't do directly. And then occasionally they get busted. I think that's what it comes down to. And so, we had this naval intelligence guy is the one who started. His family's directly involved in the intelligence agencies. He continues to do this whole game calling thing eventually until the 1987 incident. And then, as I said, once that gets exposed, Ramon Martinez tried to blow the whistle. The DOJ investigation led nowhere. But Scott Hunt was another officer who was trying to blow the whistle. And then Sergeant Stitcher, he died under, they say, natural causes, but it was, the timing I think is pretty weird. I've tried to find his family members just to see if any of them had feelings or thought that it was, unusual, his death, because we know for sure he was trying to be a whistleblower as well and talk about this. And then he dies of, I believe, natural causes or a heart attack or something around that time. We know that the CIA and other agencies have ways to make those things look like a natural death if they want to get rid of somebody. So, I mean, it's just, it continues on. And myself, and like I said, John Brisson and a few others, we're trying to still pull on these threads because, like I mentioned, I filed a new open records request. I was reading an article, one of the old articles about the finders, and there's a report from 87 before the big scandal where a lawyer in Culpeper, Virginia, he said that he was representing a former member of the finders who had filed for divorce against one of the still current members. And so they're in the middle of a divorce, and this lawyer's just being the divorce lawyer. But he says that the Finders members started to stalk him, started to survey him and harass him. And so in the article I found, it says that he filed an injunction in the court asking them to basically put a restraining order on the member of the Finders on him so that they will leave him alone. But also he apparently filed a list of the members of the Finders in the court record. So as part of the divorce proceedings. So I'm trying to see if I can find that record, because then we would have a list of all the names of the people who this lawyer said were harassing him. And then from there, we could dig further and further. And that's kind of like it is with a lot of these things. Like, with the Epstein thing, it's like you get a little thread and you can pull on it and maybe it goes nowhere. But that's the job of being an investigator, right? And like actually doing investigative journalism that the mainstream won't do, which is why, a former UFC fighter needs to come out and talk about it and do these things, because they're not doing their job.
Do this, but I realize the FBI is not investigating, so I'm having to try to put stuff together. It's ridiculous that people like me and you have to be doing this. But clearly the FBI and DOJ, they're covering it up. And I believe I read the terms, the CIA called it a family matter, an internal matter and a family matter, and shut down the operation. Like, how insane is that? They just came down and shut it down. FBI reports show that. I think something 94 came out again, right? There's the summary of it.
It's astounding to me, man. It really is one of those kind of things. Like I said, when you start to look into it, you're just like, how could this not be more widely reported? I mentioned too that I talked to Robert Terrell. His name was Toby, Robert Terrell. And if you read any of the old articles, the original articles of the Finders, he was the spokesman. And he did a press conference with his back turned to the media, and he had a Ronald Reagan mask on the back of his head. And he's just I don't know, being all weird and goofy. And whenever, everything was closed down and they said, whoops, it's a big mistake, he was the one who really was like, the media's, they did a horrible job. We're just regular people just trying to live our lives. Well, as I mentioned, I tracked him down in Florida. He was still living in the Tallahassee area, and he was living up in this freaking attic, basically above a restaurant. And he did agree to do an interview, and that interview is in my documentary, Who Will Find What the Finders Hide. And so at the time when I was researching, this was the very beginning of my documentary. I had just finished filming my Epstein documentary. I had just literally opened the door to the Finders, so I didn't know much about it. So when I went to go see him, I kind of let him just say his whole thing, right? And hey, just tell us your story. I didn't really push back much because I didn't know a whole lot. But then when I got home and I continued to investigate it, I realized okay, this guy told me a lot of bullshit. The things he's saying do not line up with what we actually have in the documentation. And so I put that in there. I let him say his piece. I didn't edit out his words, but I also included where the documents contradict what he said. And so the documentary comes out, it becomes like an underground hit. It gets some attention at that time in 2019. It's slowly got more and more over the years as this topic has become more popular. Then in 2021, I was on the road again in Florida doing a tour, and I decided to reach out to him again to see if he would do a follow-up with me. And he did agree to do a follow-up. This is also on my website at theconsciousresistance.com. And he was pissed off though, this second interview, and I included the whole thing in there. He's like, I thought we had good rapport. I thought you were a good journalist, but then you put out this documentary, this conspiracy. He just starts to lecture me about conspiracy theories and blah, 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 and says, this is a sign that there's something wrong in your head. Why do you obsess over pedophile? Just this whole thing, right? And I let him do his little spiel, but then I was able to hit him harder this time to say, look, okay, you can say this is just conspiracy theories online, but why do I have medical examiner reports claiming that the children were abused? Why do I have Ramon Martinez's report? Why do I have, the report we just read from Metro Police? And he just pretty much was dismissive. He's like, yeah, the first medical examiner report found evidence of child abuse, but did you read the second one? Because the second one corrected it and said that there was no abuse, which made me think even more that second report was a total cover up in some way, because he wanted to be sure. Exactly. He wanted to be sure to say this is the report to really pay attention to. And then about Martinez, he's like, oh, that guy got fired. He lost his job because he's just crazy. And I told him, I said, well, he thinks that he was fired and because he everything he said got covered up. And then about the CIA internal matter, he was just like, oh, what? I don't know what you're just basically was just kind of dismissive. But if you want to see him for yourself, like you can go judge him. People can watch and see what you think about his body language. And like I said, I didn't attack him. I just said, look, these are the facts. You can say what you want. You can say we're just crazy conspiracy theorists online. There's something wrong with us, whatever. But he definitely tried to I thought you were a credible journalist, but now you're spreading all these conspiracy theories and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I tried to do my due diligence to at least give them their say. And I will say I've tried to track down children as well who are now adults. They would be, this is 40 years later.
That would be interesting.
I mean, they would be 40 years. So they would probably be one of the kids was 6 years old, right? So they'd be 46 years old by now.
These names or the names hidden because they're children.
Their names, we only got a couple of their names, obviously, because like you said, they're children, their names weren't fully publicly released, but there are a couple of names that have been found. And I haven't had any luck getting any of them to speak. I will say none of them have come forward voluntarily to say, hey, I was a member of the Finders and I was abused. But it could be that they're afraid. It could be that they're not alive. I mean, there's all kinds of different things, right? I don't think that disproves. To me, somebody has to be able to explain, why did a Metro Police Department investigator feel confident enough to claim that the Finders were connected to the CIA? Why did Ramon Martinez see these, pictures of naked children and all this different stuff? You have to kind of explain all that away in order to say there's just to be like Vice or whatever and say this is just another QAnon type thing. But there's two other points I wanted to make. You mentioned the goat thing. So one of the reasons there was claims of Satanism or some sort of ritualistic activity, because I do think that term satanic gets thrown around so easily. When I have reported on other cases like this Utah ritual abuse case, maybe we can talk about another time, that's been ongoing. And that is literally where victims say these people were raping people while praying to Lucifer. You could call that satanic Luciferian, but in the Finders case, there's no mention of Satan.
Just a picture.
Exactly. It's just people. And so it's definitely weird, and it's just people interpreting it. So what it is, and we haven't been able to get there's so many records of this, but you can find it. They talk about how there was pictures of the adults in white robes, and they had two of the kids, and they were beheading a goat. And what the Finders say is, this is we're teaching our kids homesteading skills. We want them to be, learn how to, gut their own animals.
Putting a ritual with robes and.
So they're in white robes, which they claimed was to protect them from the blood splatter. So again, I'm just telling you what they claimed. They said it was white robes or towels or whatever, so that when the blood splattered, it didn't get everywhere. And these pictures have never been released, but you can see them listed in the documents. It says picture of child holding goat head, picture of child, this and that. So they literally had the kids hold up one of the goat's heads. They had pictures of them with the goat in the robes and stuff. And now maybe if we were able to actually see those documents, if they didn't redact those, then we would have a better picture and we could all judge. Does that look satanic or ritualistic to you? Or does that just look like teaching the kids how to, cook and kill their own meat? You could decide then, but of course we don't have those images.
They won't let us.
Exactly. And that whole incident is nicknamed Goatgate, even by the Finders. When I talked to Toby Terrell, he's like, oh, that old Goatgate thing, again, he was just very dismissive, just saying they're just trying to teach the kids how to have skills and stuff. The other one was there was a claim that out the back of one of their warehouse, I think on the backside of the warehouse that goes into a park, Grover Archibald Park, that there was a circle of stones back there. And this is at least what Toby Terrell said. He's like, oh, somebody saw a circle of stones. And so they went and, told the cops that we were satanic and this and that. And so that's why I say, in terms of strong evidence, there's some weird shit going on there, but we don't have as documented. I put that kind of towards the weaker end, but we definitely have the intelligence. There's clearly evidence of intelligence going on. And then there's definitely a report of child abuse going on.
Real quick, do you remember? I remember reading there was all these different flyers and papers, both internationally, where they're trying to acquire kids, plus in America potentially kidnapping kids through babysitters. Do you know more exactly what those documents were? Or?
So only just what you've read, what you saw there. There's reports of that. Yeah, they were responding to babysitter ads. They were responding. This is why I think that they were even in the town. You can actually find in Culpeper. You can find. An article describing how Marion Petty's walking around the town and his weird group, the Finders, are out applying for jobs. I think this is part of their intelligence activity, that they're just they're responding to all kinds of newspaper ads. They're just trying to get as much information as possible. It could have been the babysitting stuff could have been related to starting to, abuse kids or to, get to know who has what kids. I don't know what it was, but I
don't know.
It could be that.
Not hard evidence of it, but points that direction.
Exactly. And that's what you see with the finders, and is that there's these really strong statements about intelligence and cover-ups from multiple people, not just one person like the mainstream likes to say with Ramon Martinez. And then there's the medical examiner report of child abuse. And then there's the goat thing. And then there's just a whole bunch of weird stuff that we can't prove anything with necessarily, but it sure just adds up to something weird, in the end. Yeah. And I think that's that. Yeah, go ahead.
I think particularly when you look at like all these cases together, because a couple of years ago I thought it was all nonsense. Then I started looking at all the different cases, and the similarities are so similar in all of them. It's just, and like I said, the Detroit, I'm saying that right, with all the bodies they actually have, that was for sure. And I think there was like 20 mysterious deaths in the investigation of that. Judges being moved, the police being in on it. And you see similarities of these high level people running things. And now you look at the Epstein Files, where clearly the FBI and the DOJ is part of the cover up, not helping release it. So if you look at patterns,
Absolutely.
Take one by itself is really weird, but then when you put them all together, it becomes overwhelming, in my opinion. That there is.
It's hard not to notice it, right? I mean, so I want to tell you one other thing about how I got the title for I think you might enjoy this story, how I got the title for the documentary, Who Will Find What the Finders Hide, right? So as I mentioned, when I came back from my Epstein documentary and I was visiting his house in October 2018, it was October 2018. I started to work on the Finders story. So I interviewed Robert Terrell, and then I came home and I just started digging into all these different records. And as I mentioned, I did have a couple incidents where some windows were opened and just weird things that a friend of mine kind of gave me a tip of like, maybe you should make this whole investigation public while you're doing it, just to be safe. Yes. And so before I even knew I was going to make a documentary, it just started out with me like, hey guys, here's this Finders story. Let's dive into the different pieces. And so there was an original 7-part investigation, which is still on my website, just me looking at the different pieces of the puzzle that we've uncovered here today. And towards the end, I started to find some really weird shit, which eventually led to the title of the documentary. So first, I found some old Yahoo blogs from like the early 2000s where it was like a couple talking about, we were renting our house to, trying to rent our house to people. And this one couple came by and they were going to be potential renters and they were really interesting. And then we had a weird feeling about them though, and we decided to look them up. And basically this potential renters that they were talking to, they realized these were former members of the Finders. And so they named them. Stuart Livingstone's one of them. There's a few others. And so from that random blog, there was a couple of comments there. And somebody's, commenting saying, hey, the names of the Finders have been leaked on this place. Now that's a link to another random blog. It starts to become like this little rabbit trail of random clues. And this is just like some obscure, Jimmy's vacation home.blogspot. It wasn't a conspiracy website at all. It was just like a random thing. And he said, I started to hear about this Finders group and I've discovered this list. And it was just a list of a bunch of people, which I was able to confirm. Some of them were mentioned in newspaper reports as being the mothers of the children and in other places. So this is a legit list, right? And from there, there's another comment which leads to a YouTube video. And so I'm just like following this breadcrumb trail, and it goes to this YouTube video. And the YouTube video, man, is like, it's an unlisted video, first of all. And the YouTube channel, the name of the YouTube channel was Stuart Livingstone, who was one of the members of the Finders. And it's an unlisted video, so you can't find it unless you find this random obscure trail that I happened upon of the Yahoo blog and this thing. And anyways, and the video is just like, it seemed like some kind of MK Ultra shit, man. I mean, I'm talking like flashing colors. Your color is blue, like all kinds of red. Your color is green. Your trigger is mermaid. Just some weird shit going on. I didn't even want to watch the whole thing, but I did screen record some of it. And then in the description, there's a cipher, and I'm not good with cryptography, but I could tell like this is some kind of code. So, I was able to solve it using some tools online, and that code leads to another YouTube video. And basically this is a couple of trails where one YouTube video to the next, each of them with weirder and creepier image. Wow. And to the final one with the final cipher, when you finish it, it says, who will find what the Finders hide? And I decided to name my documentary that because I was like, if somebody left this on purpose, because it just seemed too weird to be a troll. Like, who's going to find that? It's just too obscure. And so I do document that in my early investigation and unfortunately, all those videos have been taken down now. But I did do a screen record of at least piece of it because I didn't, like I said, I didn't want to. I have a pretty strong mind, but I was just like, I don't know. Yeah, exactly. I'm
I don't
like,
think I watched either. You mentioned MK Ultra. I think that's really important because MK Ultra was a program when they were trying to like brainwash people through drugs, torture, all kinds of strange methods. This could be some kind of MK Ultra. You know, all the records were wiped out of MK Ultra. They say it stopped, but there's no, we don't know if it stopped or not for sure.
yeah, and
So
I
I think
think that's
interesting
that's an
angle.
important piece because everybody assumes. I mean, we know for sure the LSD, all these other more MK Ultra, MK Delta, these other programs. We know that they've tried with extreme low frequencies. I mean, the CIA, the intelligence agency, they've tried every way you can think of to try to see how to manipulate the human mind. And some of them did involve like drug culture. We now know a lot more about Charles Manson and all the weird connections there.
Yeah.
But it seems like the Finders was potentially just a different path. They weren't the hippies on drugs. They were the more sometimes they were in suit and ties. They were dressed nice, but they still had this free love thing going on. They just played games. Like it might have been just another way that they discovered to manipulate the human mind by giving people games and sort of, finding some way to sort of get them involved in things that they don't even realize they're playing. Like maybe when he was sending them out on these random tasks to go grab some object or to go collect something, they're part of something that they have no idea they're even doing. Like they're porting information or getting data that they don't know is a part of a bigger picture. So yeah, I definitely think that there's potential for the Finders to have been a part of something larger, whether it's MK Ultra or just some military operation, because again, like Marion Petty and his family's connections to intelligence, I just don't think you can ignore it. And he has this really cutesy story of like, I was in intelligence and then I just retired and became a chauffeur and then I just retired and now I just walk around all day. I'm not, but I think in my conclusion, I think he is what they call a non-official undercover. So, it's kind of the sort of thing from the movies. Like if you're exposed, we basically disavow you. Like we have no idea who you are. But in the meantime, you're allowed to do certain things. You've been given an identity, a name, a job, etc., and you can sort of operate with impunity. But if you're ever discovered, then they basically just cut you loose. And I think that's what Marion Petty was.
Yeah, no, I think that sounds like a good assessment. And Epstein seems like a level above this. Even once he got the first scandal, he managed to keep his power and keep running all these operations. He was running at such an elite level that shows you this stuff is real. Like if people haven't been looking through those files, if you think there's nothing with the Epstein case, you're retarded. They're the conspiracy theorists now.
Yeah, I know. And it's on one hand, man, it's been weird because as somebody who has been talking about Jeffrey Epstein since 2016 and released my documentary November 2018.
Like what made you do that?
Well, I mean, I'd been, like many of us, have been hearing about this guy named Jeffrey Epstein kind of in the whispers of the conspiracy community, or this idea that pedophiles, of course, going back to Jimmy Savile in the UK and, and at that time, Prince Charles, there was always these kind of whispers of these kind of things. And I had heard about the Franklin scandal, but once I started to really understand who Epstein was, and I started to pay attention to it in 2016, 2017, I basically started to follow the civil trials because everybody was aware, like, hey, this guy had this whole rumor, this billionaire guy had been busted in the mid 2000s and he knew all these famous people and now he's out. But there was that whole time, there was civil trials going on. The victims were trying to sue him because they couldn't get, criminal charges against him. And so I started to follow some of those proceedings. And in 2018, I think it was December 2018, right after my documentary, I went to Florida for one of the civil suits. Epstein didn't have to show up because that was just how they treated him. His attorney showed up, but he didn't have to be there. And I actually interviewed Brad Edwards, one of the attorneys. People may have seen this interview because MAGA uses this interview all the time that I did with him, because he said that Trump was one of the people who answered the phone and gave him information that checked out. So MAGA always tries to use that clip and say, see, Trump had nothing to do with this. But Brad Edwards, that wasn't what he was saying. He was just saying, Trump did give information. What I always like to point out is like, well, that was more than a decade plus after the original charges and after two decades of them being friends. It's pretty much just he's tossing him under the bus at that point. It's not like he came forward. And in fact, in the new Epstein documents, the most recently released ones, there's been reported in the last week how there's a 2019 FBI report. It's an interview of Michael Ryder, who is the former sheriff in Palm Beach. And he basically said that in 2006, Trump called the police department and said, I'm glad you guys are going after him, but So that's of course MAGA seeing that and like, see, Trump's the one behind it all. But Trump also said we all knew what was going on. Everybody in New York knew what was happening. And he says Ghislaine was evil and this and that. But to me, what that shows is that, again, Trump knew what was going on and did nothing until it's already,
for 10 years. Exactly.
Yeah. And he, going back to the 90s, he's like, oh, Jeffrey's a terrific guy. We all know he likes them young and stuff like that. So to me, it's like, and not to make this just about Trump or anything, but just because I see so much of MAGA trying to like,
I know I get so mad people look at this through a political lens. It's both sides. Like, well, why didn't Obama? It's like, yeah, they're all in. That's the problem. It's not a left or right
exactly. The Clintons, expose them all as far as I'm concerned, but I don't think anybody should be given a free pass. And of course, we know that Trump fought tooth and nail to prevent the release of these documents. But yeah, I mean, that's why I started to originally investigate it, is because I already kind of knew who Epstein was. And then when Trump decided to run for president, I was like, well, shit, this guy, like Trump knew Epstein and the Clintons. And then, as I said, I was investigating it just kind of behind the scenes. I hadn't done any videos on it yet. But when I was doing a speaking tour in October 2018, I was in Florida and I looked up the address of Epstein's house and I was like, holy shit, this is like 30 minutes away. And I was with my wife. I was like, baby, we're going to Epstein's house, and went there in the beginning of my documentary, which you can find on my website as well. It's called Bringing Down Jeffrey Epstein. It's just 30 minutes long. The beginning scene is me standing outside of Epstein's house, like filming the opening of it. And this was a year before he got arrested, so I don't know if he was inside or he was probably traveling or something, but, so I'd kind of already been paying attention to this stuff. And once I got into Epstein, and then that went a little viral, it's got like 600,000 views. Most of them came at that time, especially once Epstein did get arrested. That eventually led me to say, well, let me keep going. And I did the finders. And then pretty much after 2 years of looking at documents describing rape and abuse, I decided to focus on other things. But
you have to take a break on that. Have you looked into Zorro Ranch that much? Because I was last night stuck going down that rabbit hole, and sometimes there's a lot of oddities there.
I think Zorro Ranch is a huge piece of this puzzle that has definitely not got the attention it deserves. The island, everybody talks about the island, which of course it's like an island in the middle of nowhere. We could imagine all kinds of crazy things, and there's definitely stuff happening there. But Zorro Ranch is right there in the United States. It was owned by the former governor. The governor of New Mexico was friends with Epstein, Bill Richardson. Mm-hmm. It's now been passed on to other people. I definitely think that we don't know the full puzzle of what's happened there.
Come across there, just like 2-3 minutes. I just want to go through this real quick because I haven't fully finished it. Okay, the guy that bought the ranch, he bought it under an LLC, and that's not unusual. But what's his name? Something Huffman's or something. Let me look this up, because he has another company that like he invests in, like where they use like literally baby hearts for this, like this transhumanism, like stay young stuff, the same stuff that like Peter Thiel's in. And if you look through the Epstein files, there's tons of emails with him, with these high-end scientists, the same ones that are working with these companies, about like starting this breeding program at the ranch, like having 20 women pregnant at once. Several victims claim he took their babies. Several other ones said he tried to buy their babies. So you look at this. So then I started going down another rabbit hole. Apparently, he built a whole medical facility there with exact same equipment that this other lab uses. Of course, I can't remember the name of the lab, but it's the one that is it Huffman? It's the one that he invested in, which is for they're taking his baby tissues to try to keep you young. So like there's so many ties, and it gets like way deeper. Like the power that was pulling from the ranch, a whistleblower said, was pulling like 25 times the power it should have been, and pulling 24 hours a day. So like, what's the power? Like they had some kind of big like medical facility there potentially, and the FBI's never gone in. The FBI's still not searched it. The guy who bought it won't let him search it. It just seems he has ties with Wexner through they're both like land moguls. So I didn't find a direct tie, but they're both the two. One's the biggest land mogul in Texas. One's the biggest land mogul in Ohio. See all these connections. Oh, it gets more bizarre. I found flight records from Zorro Ranch going straight to Dallas, which is where the new facility that's doing these experimentations with like baby parts. There was like 14 flights to there, and one time the power went out, and it was right after a flight went. So there's a lot more pieces, but just looking at all this, I feel like, I don't know, maybe there's nothing there, maybe I've gone crazy, but it looks like there's something weird that's connected between these labs. And well, Peter Thiel, he sends him a letter too, inviting him to the ranch. He goes, as you probably know, I work for the Rothschilds. And he wanted him to come to Zorro Ranch, and Peter Thiel's invested in these same transhumanism companies.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't think you're crazy for asking those questions, man. I think that those are the kind of questions that need to be asked. And I guess the hard part is to not lose your mind getting lost down the rabbit hole, because this really is such an endless rabbit hole. And we're finding out, I did my podcast earlier today, and I was talking about how even outside the United States, you've got Indian politicians and business people being fired and exposed. Lithuania announced that they're going to do a human trafficking investigation related to some of their politicians and Epstein. The UK, there's fallout happening. Norway, the royalty now is basically having their own scandal because of how close that she was to Epstein and calling him sweetheart and baby and all this kind of stuff. I mean, there's so many threads to this that literally span the entire world, and just dozens, if not hundreds of countries that we probably will be digging into this for years to come. And
very top people. Oh, wait, let me add another important. I just remembered. He won the lottery, $80-something million lottery. We took a cash payout of $29 million, the Zorro Ranch. They used that money. I think that was like the day, right when we went into jail, they won the lottery. How likely is that Jeffrey Epstein wins the lottery? They took that $20 million and they paid it to all these different medical people, it looks like. And they had this guy that funded it. I can't remember his name. He's one of the people that was just mentioned as one of the co-conspirators, not by Thomas Massey, by the other guy. So you start seeing all these like weird connections. They're flying medical, they have flights with no passengers listed on it, but they're carrying medical stuff. So I don't know. There's still a lot of research to be done there, but I hope some other researchers like me. I'm a fighter, so no one will take me serious. I hope some other researchers start going down this rabbit hole.
I think that there will be more people. And I'll just add one other thing to the Epstein side of it, that one positive, not that I think it's going to really go anywhere, but one positive of the fact that this isn't going away is that this week on the 18th, Les Wexner is going to have to give a sworn testimony now. Now, I will say just in the last 24 hours, it's been reported that it went from he was going to come to DC to now the House committee is doing a special exception for him, and they're going to fly to New Albany, Ohio, and record and do this deposition privately. So we'll never actually see his face. He won't have to come to DC. But nevertheless, he's being questioned. Now we'll see if they redact the questions or how that goes. The other thing, Wexner is also being subpoenaed in a lawsuit separate from Epstein, but basically there is a coach at Ohio State University. There's a really good documentary about this called Surviving Ohio State, where a bunch of guys, I mean, these are male wrestlers who were abused.
I wrestled in college. This is insane.
I encourage you to watch this documentary if you haven't, man, because for one, I think it's also interesting because, of course, women are typically victims, but males are also victims too. But a lot of people, especially in the case of these guys, one of them even says, he's like, we're tough wrestlers. Nobody wanted to believe us.
Men. Yeah, it's like,
he's like, no, come on. This old doctor at the school, he was doing all these weird things to you. So, I mean, it's totally messed up. But the point is, when that was going on, Wexner was on the board of regents at the university, and it's very much believed that he knew what was going on. So the victims there have been fighting for months to try to serve him a subpoena, and his lawyers have been avoiding it. Well, now a judge just ruled this last week that he actually does have to testify. He has to come to court and give a deposition. So I have some hope that, the people like Wexner, and of course we know Wexner was part of the Mega Group, which is this wealthy group of Jewish financiers tied to Israel and all that stuff, that I don't think he's going to go to jail. I don't have any hopes of that at all. But if even more pieces of this could come out, I think then it's a victory in the end. So, yeah, I mean, these are the kind of works that I've been doing for years, man. And I really do try to approach it, which it seems like you do as well, from an objective. Like I tend to just call my work a true crime because, true crime has gotten really popular, but also you can look at these cases without having to go so far off into conspiracy speculation. Again, it's a little bit is necessary because there's so many pieces of the puzzle, but even if you just stick to the facts, it's crazy enough already. So, I consider the documentary Who Will Find What the Finders Hide to be a true crime documentary, the Bringing Down Jeffrey Epstein. And I have a 17-part documentary series called The Pyramid of Power that people can check out for free at thepyramidofpower.net. That basically is my ultimate kind of research at looking at all the pieces of the puzzle, the education system, the media, big wireless, all the different pieces and how it interconnects. Yeah, exactly. And then at the top, the final episode is answering, okay, well, now that we've described the sort of infrastructure, who or what is at the top of that? And I interviewed Adam Green, David Icke, Mark Passio, G. Edward Griffin, James Corbett, all these really brilliant, amazing researchers, and give them each their time to say, okay, it's the Jews, it's the Jesuits, it's the Masons, it's, and just let all the claims kind of sit out there and sort of debunk and disprove what can be debunked, and then also say, hey, this looks like it might be true, where there's is actually fact. So that has been a labor of love that I've been working on. I actually just released the book version of it too. You can see behind me on my shelf here. People can find all those details though at thepyramidofpower.net. You can watch the entire series. And like I said, it's a true crime series. My transcript with everything, every source, every link, every document is available there for free. And, you know, the world is really stranger than fiction. The truth is really scarier than fiction.
Yeah, I thought this stuff was all crazy before. I remember even 18 months ago, interviewing David Icke, thinking this old man's crazy. Now I'm like, so many things he was told me, like, ended up happening like afterward and stuff. I'm looking back, being like, whoa. But I don't even know. You know, I'm trying to figure out the truth. It sounds like you are too. Embarrassingly, I haven't watched any of your work. I need to. We've been talking for a while.
All good, man.
And check
it out when you get time.
Yeah, I'm in a tight time schedule today. But anything else you want to close with before we wrap up? I definitely want to do another, because there's so many pieces.
I would love to come back, man. I'd love to come back and talk to you about the Utah ritual abuse scandal and the Mormon church. That's another whole thread that I've been pulling on for a few years. That it's just like with the finders, mountains of evidence and cover-ups and judges and all kinds of foolery going on. But if anybody wants to know more about my work, my main website is theconsciousresistance.com. That's where you can find my podcast, my interviews, my books, and all my documentaries are available there. And as I mentioned, the Pyramid of Power, the main website for that is thepyramidofpower.net. And you can find my books and all that good stuff there. You can follow me on Twitter, YouTube, all those usual places, man. And I appreciate you giving me some time to talk about the finders.
Yeah, we were supposed to do something a while ago. Then I'm so busy, somehow we lost touch of each other. But I'm glad we got all this stuff coming up. And I remembered, we were supposed to do something on the finders like a year ago or something.
Yeah.
You know, but maybe it's better with the timing now. So I think we definitely should do another one in a few months, maybe sooner, because there's so much tying together. Depending on what kind of news comes out, I think this stuff's all relevant, and people are starting to realize this isn't some crazy kookery conspiracy. And I don't have all the answers. You don't have all the answers, but we can see something's off.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to come back on, man. Thank you for the time.
Well, thank you, Derrick. Have a good one. Hey guys, I'm demonetized everywhere. So if you want to support me and the podcast, go to fightbackpodcast.com and you can buy some cool merch like the shirt I'm wearing now.